Formation of the anticipated Confederation took place during the institution's first summit held on Saturday, marking a significant step towards establishing an economic military bloc and moving away from the regional and Western countries following a series of coups. In a joint statement, the leaders of the countries, that is Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso, Assimi Goïta of Mali and Abdurrahman Chani of Niger, praised the successful synergy between the three states in combating terrorism within the Alliance region, precisely in the Liptako-Goma region, and emphasized their commitment to deeper integration amongst member states. At the end of the said summit on Saturday, the leaders also elected Mali's leader, His Excellency Colonel Assimi Goïta, to serve as president for a one-year term. Within the Confederation, the leaders intend to tackle security, diplomatic and economic challenges of common interest, a decision that formalized their withdrawal from ECOWAS. While the initiative is commendable, questions have been raised about what impact the creation of the Confederation will have on the region and how far can the three states go together, and can they sustain their project over a long term? Ladies and gentlemen, like the topic of today evokes, AES countries form a confederation. What impact? Join us as we evoke this and more in the course of today's edition. Stay with us. Beautiful afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for honoring the invitation of our European African channel for you Media Africa. Today we're focusing on the West African sub-region, but this time around we focus on the alliance of Sahelian states, where the three countries that had quit the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, that is Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger, have recently formed a confederation. And proud of following that recent announcement or signing of the treaty, we saw the ECOWAS President Omar Touré that came out to say that this would destabilize the region. Before we get down to discussions in a bit to comprehend today's topic of discussion, for which we are being joined by Dr. Stanley FONGOD, a Pan-Africanist and an economics this day. Greetings to you, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Sharon. I hope we have a fruitful conversation, and thank our televiewers and those who will be watching this program subsequently online for joining the platform as well.
Exactly. Now, with regards to today's topic, before we dive right into discussions, let's welcome this report in a bit to comprehend the stakes involved. According to ECOWAS Commission President Omar Touré, the withdrawal of Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger from the regional bloc would disintegrate the regional bloc. He added that the freedom of movement and a common market of 400 million people were some of the major benefits of the near 50-year-old bloc were under threat if the three countries left. The Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, said on Sunday the region risks disintegration and worsening insecurity after the military-led Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger made clear their intentions to leave the bloc by signing a confederation treaty. The Alliance of Sahelian States Treaty, signed on Saturday, which underscored the three countries' determination to turn their backs on the 15-member ECOWAS, which has been urging them to return to democratic rule. Touré told an ECOWAS summit in Nigerian capital Abuja that funding of economic projects worth over $500 million in Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger could be stopped or suspended. The three countries' withdrawal will be a major blow to security cooperation, particularly in terms of intelligence sharing and participation in the fight against terrorism. Touré said he feared the withdrawal could also worsen insecurity in the region. ECOWAS leaders gathered at the summit to discuss the implications of the treaty by the Alliance of Sahel States, whose military government seized control in a series of coups in the three states in 2020 to 2023, and severed military as well as diplomatic ties with regional allies and Western powers. You heard that right. These countries have severed military as well as economic ties with regional and international actors. With regards to their mutual interests, now, like we earlier on mentioned, we are having this conversation with you, Dr. Stanley of FONGOD. Now, to debut today's edition, now, following the signing of the Confederation or the Confederation Treaty by the three member states that had left the ECOWAS regional bloc, now the president of ECOWAS, Omali Toure, mentioned that this would destabilize or disintegrate the bloc as well as the region. Now, do you agree with the ECOWAS president?
We have come to a place in history where we really need to start defining our terms a little bit more accurately and making sure that we do not fall sway to whatever it is that is being pushed by people who have maintained the status quo for too long. Before we start thinking about the Confederation, we need to ask ourselves what were the building blocks that led to what happened on Saturday. First of all, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger has suffered some of the worst possible crimes against humanity, that has been enthroned on them by Islamic jihadis flowing in from the north of Africa, especially from places like Libya. Exactly. And so you are looking at a region that has not known any kind of stability for such a long time, and there has been absolutely almost nothing that ECOWAS has done. In these regions, the only country that has absolutely put their foot down in trying to be able to help mitigate the sheer level of terror that people have been experiencing in this region will be a country like France. But France did this because of her sheer interest in the region. And now that these boys decided to be able to take matters into their own hand, to be able to have the salvation of their countries in their hands, and France basically pushed out, they had to be able to create this confederation to be able to help themselves manage the issues primarily of security. There used to be a place on the African continent that was, the El Dorado in the Sahara. It was known as, the Vegas in the Sahara. This will be a place called Timbuktu. Long before there was a Vegas, there was a place called Timbuktu. And Timbuktu is in Mali. Timbuktu is home to some of the most finest, pristine manuscripts, that you will find anywhere else in the world, especially on the African continent. Manuscripts on almost everything. This is 7th century manuscripts to about 14th century manuscripts that were written on all sorts of topics, especially by Islamic scholars. Within the past decade, there has been a lot of looting and burning of ancient manuscripts because of some, Islamic ideology which absolutely nobody can understand. This has been the issue. A place that was one teeming with tourists, a place that was a vacation spot in the Sahara has become, one of Africa's eyesore. We have to be able to fully participate in ensuring that these three nations stand and do whatever it takes to be able to support their decisions to create more of a buffer zone, to maintain the level of security that they need so that their countries can actually be able to emerge, out of these decades of wars and decades of, insurgency that has come as a result of the Islamic, jihadist movements that is scattered across the region. If we don't do this, and if you're relying on ECOWAS has not done anything, absolutely nothing, in helping this region, heal from the issues of terrorism. And so if you're waiting on ECOWAS, I think that it absolutely makes no sense. So whatever the ECOWAS, president is talking about means nothing to anyone. I think that those boys in the Sahel knows exactly what is beneficial to them. There's a common old expression that it is he who wears the shoes that knows exactly where it pinches. So let's leave those boys alone and just give them the support that is needed.
Exactly, the support which you're talking about is something that is quite difficult amidst pressure from regional actors as well as the international community. But then in a bit to look at this in depth, you've cited a lot of points step by step that led to the creation of this confederation, which was something that was anticipated when these countries decided to come together in signing the Liptako-Goma Charter. But then, despite this relevance in present day, especially with the security crisis that is plaguing that part of the African continent, Could this a treaty of a confederation, could we say the project is actually premature?
No, it's not. It's not premature at all. And I think that we basically need to start celebrating, whenever we have these micro, I call it in relationship to the continent scale, it will be quite micro, it's small. We need to start celebrating these gains. They are absolutely needed. If we have countries on the African continent that decides to be able to merge together and create some kind of a confederation, that literally will help in the areas of security, in the areas of economic integration, in the areas of political and diplomatic influence. We'll be able to have great strength, all right, because these nations come together and infrastructure development will absolutely be feasible. It will be possible. We'll be able to do things across the little tiny international borders we have on the continent, and will achieve a lot. The notion that we basically look at these three countries coming together to become more of a problem, across the region, basically does not mean it doesn't make any sense. If you look at the Sahel, what is ECOWAS afraid of? What absolutely is ECOWAS afraid of? There's nothing ECOWAS should be afraid of. If not, if at best, ECOWAS should be grateful that this region will be able to form some kind of a buffer zone between, the encroachment of Islamic terrorism that is coming in from the north, vis-a-vis those in sub-Saharan Africa, in places like Ghana, in places like northern Nigeria, in places like northern Cameroon, that's been experiencing, sporadic outbursts of fire as a result of this Islamic jihadist terrorism. We need to be able to celebrate that. So far as I'm concerned, it's not a problem. What we need is more. If the Eastern Bloc will be able to integrate like that, and then we have some areas around the Congo Basin, if they can do likewise, and then those in South Africa, sooner or later, if we have these integrations taking place, these confederations taking place, and then if a day will come when one confederation will merge with another confederation, and then we can now be able to talk about having something like an ECOWAS, but then think about having the scale of an ECOWAS across the continent, then we will be where we want to be, which will be to have a continent that is seamless, a continent that you can trade, and infrastructure development is seamless. Everybody is free to move from one country to another. We are not restricted, by international boundaries or by our monetary and physical policies. I think that we need to be able to celebrate these gains. Howbeit it's small, it's meaningful, and I think that we are moving in the right direction.
Exactly, we're moving in the right direction. And I want to recall, I remember a statement made by Abdurrahman Chani of Niger during that first summit on Saturday. He said that these three countries forming this confederation will be able to tackle insecurity within their region like it has never been done before. Now, looking at the favorable winds, what favorable winds are driving the states towards the realization of this project, which is in line with their own integration, because we see that they have gotten several sanctions from the Economic Community of West African States, one that has impacted them negatively in terms of economies, but this country stood fast to be able to overcome all these challenges and still went ahead with the creation of this confederation. So, looking at these favorable winds, now how far do you think that these winds could take the attempt between these three countries for them to be able to thrive?
Look, first of all, the winds are many. If you look across those three countries, the issues of security, which was earlier on mentioned, and it's so vital because, of course, Mali, Niger, they have suffered tremendously, at the hands of, jihadists and folks who have whatever reason, have, basically converted, such beautiful countries into wasteland, where villages has been razed to the ground, where men are on the run as a result of, them not wanting to become part of whatever is being pushed from North Africa. You have to understand that because of this merger, we should be able to have a lot more projects that otherwise would not have been possible on the in that particular region, because that you'll be looking for one country, to be able to borrow money from, some international corporations. But with those three countries coming together, it's possible for them to use their resources as three nations and then to be able to create the investments necessary, especially in trade, so that they can be able to build infrastructure they can put infrastructure development in place, especially in roads, energy, which is something else that region is lacking. So the notion for me that it's just security, or just them basically raising their shoulders and saying that they are doing what they're doing, probably thumping their nose against ECOWAS, frankly speaking, I don't think that they are actually thinking about ECOWAS at all. They are thinking about the salvation, of their individual nations. And I think that just on the issues of trade, on the issues of investments, on the issues of infrastructure development, they have what it takes to be able, to move their countries forward. And three countries together can do a whole lot than one single country trying to negotiate, with any other country outside of the continent. So I think that whatever Africa needs, these boys are giving us a template on how it is that we need to be able to create the structures that we need on the African continent to be able to help us negotiate better deals with countries outside of the continent of Africa, and also find ways in which we can be able to raise capital at home to be able to build up our own infrastructures rather than always dependent on capital, coming from abroad. I think that we have what it takes to be able to raise capital from home, and then get ourselves busy with our infrastructure development, and eventually, become energy independent rather, and have communication networks on the continent that is absolutely beautiful, so that we can now be able to compete, in the 21st century with the rest of the world. Let's take the template from these boys in the Sahel.
Exactly. Speaking of the wins which are in that part of the African continent, we recall that Niger is one that is rich in uranium, and these countries are really solid when it comes to standing together. Now, in a bid to proceed, there is no success without obstacles, but then when we look at these three countries now as a confederation, when you look at say the challenges which are facing the region, say in terms of security, in terms of economic as well as political difficulties, what are some of the obstacles that these recent or new confederation might face in its quest to be able to stand against all the pressure that is coming from regional as well as international actors?
I think that the greatest fear will absolutely be betrayal from within, because as the Confederation stands, there is nothing else that can actually, sway this Confederation one way or the other. These are not men who have, who are in for the money. I don't think that these are folks who are just out, for the show. They are not out for power. They are out for legitimate change on, in their individual countries and actually on the continent of Africa. And so, if they be anything that I see as a major problem, it will always be, somebody from within, that falls to the pressure from without, and therefore, sabotage what it is that they are building. Apart from that, no pressure from ECOWAS will mean anything. No pressure from the West will mean anything. No pressure that comes from the East will mean anything. The East, I mean China, I mean Russia, the Eastern Bloc. When you look at the Western Bloc, Europe and America, I don't think that they have what it takes, neither do they have the moral fortitude to be able to have any conversation on the African continent concerning anything. The reason why the region is going through hell is because men like Barack Hussein Obama were instrumental in toppling Gaddafi, and as a result of that, created a vacuum in Libya that sprung up, would just tons of militia, guns everywhere, and then folks like that with too much guns, money, not knowing exactly what to do, began pushing some French ideologies into North Africa. And what we see happening in places like Mali, it's as a result of the West. So whenever you see chaos, whenever you see uncertainty, whenever you find pain on the African continent, believe me, there is a puppet master somewhere outside of the continent continent that is pulling the strings, and in this case, the West has been the puppet master pulling strings, in Niger, pulling strings, in Mali, pulling strings, in Burkina Faso. So we have to be able to basically look at what is happening in that region, and I can tell you there's no pressure from outside that will be as meaningful to say that they will be able to topple whatever is going on so far as the Confederation is concerned. I am far more concerned about some low-level military person in this country that is paid substantial amount of money from the West, and then to basically show up and try to assassinate one of these guys. Apart from that, we are in for a long haul, and I think that is a beautiful thing. I don't see any issues whatsoever. On the economic front, I don't see any other thing that the ECOWAS can do. There's absolutely nothing they can do. Their own economy will suffer as much as, the region's economy will suffer if they try to aggressively do any other things like they've been trying to do. So far as I'm concerned, everybody's good, and it's a beautiful day to be an African.
Exactly, and I remember, just in line with the words of Omar Toure, he said that this was going to impact not just the movement of people, but it was going to have serious impact on the region as a whole, given that these countries, 3 countries that were at the heart of the Sahelian region, have withdrew from this 15-member bloc. Now, in a bid to move forward, looking at sustainability, because for every bloc, or say every confederation to move forward, there should be some level of sustainability. Looking at this project in a long-term, consider it from a long-term point of view. Now, how or what measures would these 3 states have to put into or take into consideration to ensure that the project of a confederation is one that is sustainable over time and doesn't say get to lapse? Because we mentioned this in our preamble, where we mentioned that amidst the criticisms coming from, key regional actors and the international community, these countries would have to take into consideration some measures which will entail that in the long run they can be able to still be able to be called what we know as of today a confederation.
Right. So I think that there are few things that we need to be able to look at, and few things that those folks will have to consider. First of all, they have to be able to find ways in which that the shared resources, and they absolutely have a lot of environmental protection for sustainable development. And I think that if the Confederation can imply these strategies where they can manage their natural resources, they, by combating, desertification, which is basically the pushing of the Sahara Desert into sub-Saharan Africa, if they can fight that, because what that has done eventually, that it has destroyed most of the lands that was good for agriculture. And then obviously the nomads that will normally graze their flocks in those fields can't do that anymore, so it keeps pushing them down south because the desert is fast approaching from the north. If they can be able to manage that, which is basically also addressing the issues of climate change, I think that the entire region can actually be able to regain its rigor and allow their soil to become more fertile, as much as they're trying to mine uranium, in places like Niger and other parts of the region. We need to be able to make sure that there's, that we actually have, shared resources, so that it's not every region that is rich in one thing or the other, but if they can actually be able to share resources, and then by doing so create a sustainable environment where we have road infrastructures that lead these regions. There should not be a highway that cut across this region from places like Niger all the way to Burkina Faso. There should be railways that links these 3 countries together, and if they're able to do so, then we're able to expand the market. Somebody in Mali will be able to sell to somebody in Niger farmer in Niger will be able to supply their goods to Burkina Faso and, vice versa, depending on the goods and services that they're producing. I think that these are the things that we need to be able to do and maintain long term, because the prosperity of the region is what matters. We can actually have good ideas, but once the people still remain in poverty, once we do not have good healthcare systems, once security is not in place, then sooner or later the people will rise up and they'll start chanting for freedom. The reality is that we've seen that they've been given the opportunity based on the fact that they have done quite a few number of things that has been meaningful. Now, how do they sustain this? We have to be able to make sure that, we spread the wealth around, so to say, in these nations, so that everyone can actually feel like they belong to, this great vision, which is the Confederation, knowing my favorite that sooner or later there will be no Malian, there will be no one from Burkina Faso, there will be no Nigerian. Everyone will be one, and they can be able to share their resources together and spread the wealth around and have, common mutual growth in terms of their prosperity. I think that will be the one thing that keeps this going forward. And the vision about this is, if they succeed, that template becomes a template for the African. That template becomes a template, for ECOWAS. ECOWAS might just be able to learn a lot, from this region. And even if ECOWAS basically don't like this, let ECOWAS use this as a case study to be able to figure out what is working and what is not working, so that we can build a better ECOWAS and a better Africa.
Exactly. Now, speaking of some of the challenges, you said ECOWAS could use this as a case study. But then let's look at another aspect. We have seen ECOWAS that has retaliated, because ECOWAS had a summit that was yesterday, Sunday, with respect. That was just after these leaders decided to sign the Confederation. But in respect to this, we saw the ECOWAS leaders that decided to scrap off, or to say better still, to impose visa restrictions, or a visa, how would I call it? I would like to say that they impose visas on the members of these three countries, that is Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. Now, in line with this, could we say that this is going to create a rift? Because since ECOWAS is yet unable to convince these three states to be able to come back into the regional bloc, could this decision to actually form a confederation create a rift between the ECOWAS member states and, of course, those of the alliance of Sahelian states?
I don't think that there's any issue with ECOWAS. Okay, part of the tenet for you to become, a member of the ECOWAS is that, the citizens of your countries had free, entry into all of the other states that are part of the bloc. So I don't think that there is any issue. Not that they are no longer part of the bloc. They understood, what the ramifications were before they decided that they were not going to become part of the bloc, and they decided to, pull out. I don't have any issues with that at all, and I don't think that ECOWAS, is at fault. What baffles me is when someone like Tinubu sits in Nigeria and have, some demented president from somewhere around the world, places like United States, the UK, or France, calls them and they're panicking in their boats, to give them instructions on what they have to do so far as Africa is concerned, and they just basically comes out acting like puppets and saying, this is what we want. ECOWAS is saying this, we're going to impose this, we're going to impose this. Nobody cares. Nobody really cares. As a matter of fact, we are so tired on the African continent that we fully know exactly who is bluffing, who is being paid to say what. The interest of the Africans should be at the heart of everyone within ECOWAS. If you are not thinking about what the African wants, then why are we talking about ECOWAS? If you are not interested in building an Africa with great development, if you are not helping us to be able to have economic growth that is sustainable on the African continent, then what are we talking about? Look at our bond market, look at our capital market, look at what is happening with young people across the region, people who absolutely want to be able to do better, but there's no one who is actually helping them fund the projects that they want to have. And everyone is sitting there and thinking, oh, look how America is great. Look how Europe is doing well. Look how Asia is doing well. If you show up in America, you come to a place like the Silicon Valley, you have young tech companies that are coming up, most of them that you do not know anything about, but they are being funded as we speak, and they are developing, they are building, and sooner or later we have a product like Facebook. Sooner or later we have something like Google. Sooner or later you will have some stuff like what Elon Musk is building, like ChatGPT and OpenAI. It's all about the fact that they have capital. Young people, young entrepreneurs, we need capital. If you're looking at small to medium-sized enterprises, they need capital to be able to expand. They need to be able to have access to different markets without us paying ridiculous amount of money when it comes to cross-border trade, either because custom duties are too damn high, or because remittance fees, especially when it comes to remittance, it's just too much, so you sell something to somebody, in another country, by the time you receive the money, everything has gone because of remittance fees. We have to be able to make sure that we are treating the bloc, especially when I'm talking about ECOWAS, we have to make sure we are treating the bloc with the best interest, of the African, not with the interest of the West. If you look at ECOWAS, they are nothing else but they are just puppets of the West, and they're dancing to whoever is playing this drum, and I bet you, this drum beat is coming out of Washington, D.C.
Now, in a bit to proceed, given we mentioned some of the loopholes involved, since we're speaking of us, the impact this Confederation's creation will have on the region. Now, let's focus on the aspects of political stability. Now, we might have internal as well as external factors. In a bit to focus or capitalize on the internal factors per se. Now, we have always re-echoed this need for strong institutions on the African continent, as this would foster not just democracy, but it's going to foster growth and development. Now, in that regard, when you look at the creation of this recent confederation, given these three countries are currently on that transition, would that hinder or say hamper the growth and say possibly development of this recently formed confederation in a bid for it not just to have a positive impact in the region or say these three countries, but have an impact in the long run on the African continent?
Politically, I think so, because once people begin to see that the Confederation is actually building a more prosperous nation, for their individual nations, that we can now be able to look at Niger and say this is looking more like Rwanda, that Mali is now becoming a place where, foreign investors can be able to come in, and invest their money, knowing very well that there's stability and they'll be able to make their money back. When we start looking at places like Mali, places like Timbuktu in Mali, has opened up, and people are now flying in just to be able to, take a look at these manuscripts and visit, libraries like that of the Sankore University. Once we start seeing that, then the region will fully understand exactly just how great these nations have been. And I think that that's how they influence the region. The issues of governance will absolutely be strengthened. I don't think that it will be any other way. I think democratic institutions within this region will be strengthened. I think the Confederation, will actually help strengthen governance and promote some kind of a political, stability across the region. First of all, once there's a confederation and it is strong, those are three countries we have to worry less about so far as instabilities and coups are concerned, because now they are in for the long haul. They're looking out for their own people. We have to worry about the other countries within the ECOWAS, that have dinosaurs in the name of presidents, men who are, still in power, after God knows how long. We have to be able to look at what is happening with these boys in the Sahel, just like I said, as a template, and then believe that it will have a positive, outlook at, on the region. First of all, I think that if you look at what happens when Mali, especially Mali and Niger, if they are not able to take care of the issues within their borders, it spills out, into neighboring countries. Nigeria have suffered tremendously as a result of the conflicts in Mali and in Niger. So if you're going to have a confederation that is able to handle what is happening in this region, then that will be better, because what that means is that there's going to be a shared resources of intelligence, of power, and whatever they have so far as their weaponry is concerned across the region, so that nobody is left behind. The Confederation basically at this particular point is somewhat creating more of a federal region, where you have 3 separate countries operating now as one, where you can actually be able to help one other country if there's something is going on in terms of military and its political might, or in terms of resources, maybe financial resources or material resources. We need to be able to make sure that we are able to look at what is happening in the Sahel and think that it might just be able to strengthen the other regions. Maybe ECOWAS might be able to learn what the ECOWAS mandate was all about by looking at what is happening in the Sahel.
Exactly. Now, since you're speaking of, say, helping each other within the bloc, now this is a confederation. Do you mean that a confederation definitely equals another bloc or regional bloc within the West African sub-region?
I don't know what we are looking at. So far as I'm concerned, it's a bloc already. It is a bloc already. And thanks to ECOWAS has literally, allowed them to become a bloc by the statements that they've made. So if you don't think that the Confederation basically is standing now as a bloc, then the truth of the matter is we have not fully understood it. These guys are standing as a bloc, all right? So this is ECOWAS part 2, or this is ECOWAS, the northern part, ECOWAS in the Sahel, so to say. And so whatever ECOWAS is trying to do in sub-Saharan Africa, so far as I'm concerned, at this particular point in time, those boys in the north will be able to help them understand what the mandate of ECOWAS was, in the first place, and hopefully what the mandate of the Organization of African Unity was, when men like Kwame Nkrumah, was able to create that structure so that everyone on the continent can be able to breathe, the fresh air of Pan-Africanism. I hope that the regions in the Sahel will grow strong, will be more robust, and then would have the capacity to, to bring in other members. I'm hoping that Chad will join this group, and hopefully, especially Chad. I'm hoping that Chad will join the group, because it will be vital, for the economy, for the economy of Chad. It will be vital for the regional stability, because Chad is still fighting a lot of battles, and if Chad will join this group, I think it will be better in the long run. But who knows? Maybe 2-3 years from today, we will not be talking about ECOWAS anymore. We'll be looking at a new robust system that has come as a result, of what is happening in the Sahel.
Exactly. Now, in a bit to move out now to the external factors that might, say, be hindering, or some of the impacts of this confederation, not just on the West African sub-region, but within these countries that have formed the confederation. Now, we mentioned at preamble, and of course you mentioned that in your introductory statement, that we do have this pressure coming from the regional as well as continental actors. Now, looking at continental interference per se, we have these external influences. For instance, these countries we mentioned, we reiterated that several times, that these countries have cut ties with their former colonial masters and are gradually cutting away from those of the regional community. But then such rivalries between regional and continental powers, could these complicate the work within the confederation? And of course, especially at the time when these countries are exerting pressures, we're looking at countries within the ECOWAS bloc, regional bloc, that are exerting pressure on these 3 nations to come back. Could that lead to maybe falling conflicts with adding up to what the country already has?
No, I don't think so. One of the biggest gains that these countries will be having, even if the international community will not want to do business with them, will be the fact that they will be building their local economy, and there will be raising young people who will become instrumental in bringing the capital that is needed, for them to be able to develop their region. The reason why I say so is because every time you look at most African nations, and if you look at exactly when they talk about having prosperity, it's only when they are able to get loans from the international community at the expense of their natural resources. So if you're looking at countries, in West Africa, they'll talk about rural development, they'll talk about infrastructural development, they're talking about getting billions of US dollars coming in from some countries like the United States, like China, like Russia, whichever countries, the Netherlands, and then, but what are they getting in return? They are getting their natural resources, they are carrying every single thing else out. So time has come when we do not need this natural resource, we do not need these international funds coming in just so that they can loot the country. And so if they block these three nations from participating, in this scheme where people bring in money to take out everything that the nation owns, then that's fine. That's good. The reason is because then this nation are basically not throwing themselves into debt, and whatever is being mined out of these nations, fair market value is being paid for them. I think that recently we were reading about what was happening in Niger, where, francs was paying a penny to $1. All right, a penny to $1, I think it was like 80 cents, per kilo. Meanwhile, uranium in the world market was about $300, a kilo. So if that was going to be the case, then the gains, even if no money is coming in for infrastructure development into Niger, but the amount of money they are gaining just from the sales of the uranium, is enough to be able to do a whole lot. And then private investors will also be able to come in, because obviously in the capitalistic environment, people are looking to where they can make the maximum amount of profit. And so if the area is stable, if there's stability in the region, and if the market is ready, there will be investors that will come in, VCs will show up, private investors will bring in their money, they'll bring in the capital, and they'll be able to do what they need to do. But then the second thing is, we have to be able to build the local market, especially when it comes to the bond market or the capital market. We have to develop that market. Let it be that citizens in these individual nations participate in some kind of a groundwork, set up a framework, okay, where we can be able to build the bond market, the capital market, so that young entrepreneurs on the African continent or in these regions, small to medium-sized enterprises in this region, can be able to expand, their goods and services production and go into other parts of the continent, and why not out of the continent. I believe in the fact that the African has what it takes to develop the continent, and that we don't need to be borrowing from people from the outside in the name of we're trying to look good, and we have to be able to kowtow to whatever it is that Washington says, because if not, then they're going to bar us from borrowing from the World Bank. Nobody cares about the World Bank anymore. When you have diamonds, when you have uranium, when you have gold, the World Bank should be talking to you, not you talking to the World Bank.
Now, since we're already into economics, in a bit to continue from where you stopped, now, given the creation of a confederation is definitely going to impact positively these nations in terms of boosting their economy and definitely fostering development. Now, we have been Africa has been looking towards the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. But then, with this creation or signing of a treaty to create a confederation within these three member states, that is Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, would this go a long way to accelerating the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, as well as boosting cross-border trade?
Of course, Cross-border trade will be encouraged tremendously in this confederation. That's one of the mandates for the confederation will be the fact that there's cross-border trade, the issues of remittances gone, they have a single currency. This region is a template for what it is so far as a free trade, on the continent of Africa should look like. Two things. They have the same money. They're using the CFA franc. And that means that there's no issues of remittance fees. We don't have any exchange rate issues. If you're buying something from somebody and the person tells that this particular stuff is 5,000 francs, it's 5,000 francs CFA. That's what it is. It's 5,000 CFA. It's 5,000 CFA in Mali. It's 5,000 CFA in Cameroon. It's 5,000 CFA in all the regions, countries on the continent of Africa, that they sell that particular good. The difference with Franco countries that uses the CFA is that they are differences in relationship to the cross-border trade when it comes to not remittance this time around, not exchange rate, but custom duty. So if these three nations basically once custom duty disappears within goods and services that is being produced, manufactured and sold in this region, then we are having a template of what a free Africa, especially when it comes to trade, will look like, where we have a single currency, where goods and services produced in different parts of the nations can sell anywhere on the continent of Africa, and nobody has to bother about remittance fees, nobody has to bother about custom duty, just one large market, that allows, the African to be able to fully, expand and explode and manifest their full potential without governmental restrictions. I think that what is happening with these boys in the Sahel will be the template for the continent.
Speaking of that, thank you so much, Dr. Stanley Fongo. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're just joining us, meanwhile you watch us on 4U television, listening to us over the airways of FM 96.3 4U radio, your Pan-African media group, and of course we're streaming live online. Meanwhile, today we're discussing what impact the formation or creation of a confederation would have on the West African sub-region as well as the African continent, especially as these three countries, Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger, have formalized their withdrawal from the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, amidst the pressure coming in from the regional bloc as well as the international community. Now, back to you, Dr. Stanley Fongo. Now, given we are trying to understand today's topic of discussion, you mentioned earlier on that it's going to be a model, the Confederation will be a model for the African continent. Now, given that we don't have so many confederations on the African continent per se, but as an economist, what lessons can other countries, especially countries like Libya, which we cited that the country went through turmoil, other countries in the African continent, what lessons can they draw from what's happening between these three member states of the Alliance of Sahelan States for them to be able to boost their economic sector and, of course, boost development?
I think that, if you're comparing what's happening in the Sahel with countries like Libya, that's going to be a hard sell. The reason for Libya is because Libya is no man's land. Libya, it's literally ruled by militia groups, depending on which part of town you're in. So the problem with Libya is that, there's no structure. What happened in the Sahel was that there was a structure, but the structure was failing, and these boys decided to take over. And so there are many countries on the African continent that looks like that, where the structures are there, but then whoever is at the helm, whoever is leading is failing, and then, somebody takes over, and then we start all over again. You saw that happening in the Congo as well. The issues that we are facing as we speak is that for the continent to fully be able to benefit from what is happening in the Saharan region, we need to be able to understand two things. Number one, we must fight no matter what to make sure that even if we are not having a single currency like they do, for example, the notion of a single currency, how beautiful, how robust a single currency will be is for us to look at the Confederation right now of the Saharan state. Right now, if you look at the Confederation of the Saharan state right now, you will be able to tell how beautiful a single currency can be, where you have a currency, we don't have to deal with remittance fees, we don't have to deal with exchange rate issues. Is that currency, everybody understands it, everybody understands its value. And if that was going to be a single currency, then the central banking structure for that single currency when it comes to fiscal and monetary policies will be the same. That means that no country will be able to go through any issues of inflation. If there's inflation, it is to all of us. If there's deflation, it is to all of us. No matter what happens, all of us, we're on the same table. That is good for anyone who is either producing goods and services, because they know if you are going to be purchasing raw materials, you want to make sure that you purchase the raw materials where you can be able to manufacture, do whatever you are doing without at a loss. Imagine you purchasing raw materials when there's inflation, you will be paying too much. All right, you will just be paying too much for too little because of inflation. And then when deflation comes around and then you're trying to sell that, there's all kinds of issues. We have to be able to make sure that we fully understand we need to have a single currency on the African continent. Period. We must fight to make sure that there's that single currency. And then we must also make sure that that single currency is not the central bank controlling that single currency is not in France, right? It's in one of our individual countries. I don't think that Africa is so primitive, or Africans are so primitive, that the central banking structure for 12 countries is actually in Europe. And this currency is not even accepted anywhere in Europe, not even in France. If you took the CFA to France and you went to any exchange in France and say, look, I'm trying to exchange any exchange point in France at the airport, and says, I'm trying to exchange this money, please, can I get the French franc or can I get the US dollar? They'll tell you they don't recognize that money in Paris. It's happened to me. So the notion that we can actually start talking about having something that is quite effective on the African continent without first of all addressing the issue of our money, is crazy. We have to be able to address the issue of our money. We must, no matter what, we must have our own currency, a currency that is based in Africa, by Africans, control, by Africans, for Africans. We must be able to have something that works for us. No European should be able to give us or print our money for us, or give us the kind of policies that they need. Nobody should be able to do that. Secondly, I think that if we are able to deal away with our borders and allow goods and services that are produced on the African continent, one of the mandates of the African Union should be that goods and services produced on the African continent have no custom duty, that people on the African continent, as long as you are an African, you have access to any African country. That's just, I don't think that you need any form of training. We don't need to have a seminar. We don't need to go to anything to be able to understand that we are Africans. No, but as an African, as a son of the continent, black on the continent, I should not need a visa to get into Rwanda. I don't need a visa to get into Kenya. I don't need a visa to be admitted into the Congo. I don't need a visa to visit Goma in the DRC. I don't need a visa to be in the Great Zimbabwe. All right. I don't need a visa to visit, the Orishas of the Yoruba Kingdom. I don't need a visa to be, anywhere else in Angola. I don't need a visa. I am African. All right. So we must be able to make sure. That's the first thing. If you are an African, at least you should have 3 months stay in any African country with no question asked. That should be good for a start. 3 months, no question asked. That will boost our economy. That will boost tourism. I want to be able to see the Great Zanzibar. I want to be able to be at the Victoria Falls. I want to be able to see that. I'm not just interested in paying any custom duty, any visa fees to be able to travel, within this continent. This is the land of my forefathers, and nobody should restrict me on where I should go. Let's be able to do that. America is 50 states, and you can drive to wherever you're going and nobody will ask you anything, and you can buy whatever you're buying from anywhere and no one is going to ask you anything. Why are we restricted like that on the continent of Africa? That's crazy.
that is calling for the spirit of Umbutu, the spirit of togetherness amongst Africans, and of course the clarion call at that. Now, with you, Dr. Stanley, we've been evoking that it's this creation of a confederation will equally have a security impact on not just these countries, but as well the region. We recall that this issue of insecurity in the Sahel region actually escalated in like 2012, where we saw the fall, or that was after the fall of Muammar Gaddafi back in the days. But as a result of this creation of a confederation, we saw the Nigerian leader that said they were going to tackle this at a regional as well international level, better than what has been done over the past years. Now, with that in mind, what is your appraisal? Because this, amongst other things, these leaders discuss the creation of a unified Sahel states force. Now, what's your appraisal of this new force, given we saw ECOWAS that had earlier on evoked the issue or creation of a standby force to be able to intervene in terms of regional matters? We equally saw this issue of a standby force being evoked by the African Union, which is yet to be able to get into a proper, is yet to get effective. But then, with all these, what implications would the creation of a unified Sahel states force have on the region in terms of its fight against insecurity?
One of the biggest challenges that we face on the continent really is the fact that, there is no unifying force, no standby force that has the capacity to quickly rush into any hotspot and be able to temper things down, bring order and control before things spiral out of control. If we had that, places like the northwest and the southwest region of Cameroon will not be at the stalemate in which it is today. We will not be having the issues that we have had across the Sahel, northern part of the Sahel, northern part of Mali, northern part of Niger, northern part of Burkina Faso. They will not have experienced that sheer level of terror like they have today. If you also move towards the Sudan, southern Sudan has experienced tremendous hardship, as a result of that, with nobody coming from anywhere. Those are some of the issues that we need to be able to tackle. If you look at what these boys are doing in the Sahel, they are creating in the Sahel not just a standby force, but it will be a force that I think the force will not just be on the issues if something is happening. They will be deployed in hotspots to be able to fend off those who are traveling from the so-what caravans, that are coming on trucks, from the southern part of Libya, to be able to invade and create havoc in those regions in the northern part of Sahel, northern Mali, northern Niger, and that of Burkina Faso. If they have these forces in place, then it will be able to really reduce what is happening, the sheer volume of headache, that indigenous residents, the Berbers in this part of the region, has faced as a result of this coordinated effort of jihadist groups coming into North Africa to push the jihadist Islamic agenda. I think that we must be able, collectively, to look at what they're doing and to understand that they are not fighting. They are not just fighting for the Confederation. They are fighting for the salvation of their region. That's a different thing. They are not being employed by any other persons. They basically came to fight for their own lives. They are fighting to protect their identity, to protect their region, and to protect their culture. And I think that once we fully understand this, that we need to be able to protect our culture. We have to protect our identity. We need to protect who we are. And if we are going to change into becoming anything else, let it be on our own terms. Nobody has the right to say to you that your cultures are inferior, whether it's based on religion or it is based solely on some French ideas of development. No culture is inferior. When the guys show up from the northern part of Africa, coming in the caravans of Toyota trucks, bailing in North Africa to be able to kill and destroy livestock, just so that they can push a jihadist mindset, That is wrong. When we have countries like the United States of America comes to tell us about the transgender and the gay activism on the continent of Africa, which is counterproductive to our culture, our people, and they're trying to push that down our throats, that too is wrong. You must allow the African to accept what is that the African wants to accept, to live according to her tenets, her faith, her culture, her beliefs. Whatever is African is sacred. Whatever is African absolutely cannot be touched, irrespective of who says what. Let the African create an environment where the African spirit and ideals thrive, where the African, becomes a coordinator of our own cultures and values, not somebody coming, to give us a seminar on what we should agree on and what we shouldn't agree on. That's not who we are as a people, and we shouldn't accept that from anybody else.
Now, speaking of fostering African unity, given we've seen division in some between African states or African leaders in recent times, now what could be done, or how can the African continent better foster this dream of total solidarity amongst African people?
When we elect the right people to power, when we have Africans who are in power because they love the continent and because they love their people. The problem we have is that you have leaders who are far more interested in themselves, all right? So they come to power, but they have homes in Switzerland, in the United States, in Belgium, in France. They are everywhere, all right? They have these buildings, these mansions scattered all around the world. And so they just fly out and then they have a good time in their in their fanciful mansions, and they stay there. And so in their heads and in their minds, they're Americans. In their heads and in their minds, they're Europeans. In their minds, they are French citizens and they are no longer Africans. And so that's why when they come back into the continent, they can thump their noses on us, and says, you are the commoner, you guys are common people. But not knowing that the only reason why they're able to travel and do all of that stuff is because they do so on the backs of the taxpayers in these individual nations. We pay these people. You see, the government and every government employee is not working for themselves. They are working for you. You are their employer. You, as a citizen of that nation, employ them to be able to do what they're doing, and it is always important for you to be able to fire people. And how do you fire them? You fire them by elections. You basically go to the polls and say, this nonsense must stop. You do so by basically going out also on protest. You protest to say, this thing, we don't want it. This thing we want, this is absolutely not going to, it's not acceptable. We are not going to take this. You go out and you do it like it was done in Kenya. I'm not a huge fan of what was done in Kenya because of the looting, because of the killing, because of the burning. That's crazy. When you do that, it is counterproductive to any other thing else. If somebody's going to, if you're fighting for freedom and you burn government buildings, you decapitate people, and I wonder what you would do when freedom is given to you. If you are able to bring that level of carnage and destruction in your pursuit for freedom, then something is wrong with your mind. Then your framework of what freedom should be is something that scares me. I want to see the best of you in your pursuit for freedom, not the worst of you. Because the worst of you, I wonder what you'll look like when you finally have freedom. Imagine somebody who is so who is basically spends money anyhow. He does whatever he wants and he doesn't even have the money. By the time he has tons of money, I'm sure he's going to sit on people's head and just do whatever. We need to be able to bring into power men and women who has the capacity to understand and value the culture and value the ideals of us as Africans, not people who just, have all these mansions and fly private and go wherever they want to go and do whatever they want to do. If we're going to do that, then we can be able to collectively have a group of people who will have the same mindset like those boys in the Sahel. If that's not the case, it's difficult to be talking to somebody who's listening to France difficult to be negotiating with 5 people. One is the puppet master is France, another one is Britain, another one is the Netherlands, another one is America. You will be talking to 3 puppets, thinking you're talking to human beings, not know that you're actually just talking to signboards, of different countries. That's very difficult to do. So we need to elect Africans who are Africans to run Africa and help us in our individual nations to build a collective bloc that will be acceptable and will bring the kind of development that we need.
Exactly. Now, given we are almost at the end of today's edition of the program, now looking at the changes and stakes involved amidst the regional as well as international pressure being exerted on these 3 countries, in the next days, given ECOWAS in the next days, what should we be expecting?
Excuse me, your line got muffled just towards the ending. Can you repeat that question again, please?
Okay, yeah, no problem. So I was asking, in the face of the pressure being exerted by regional as well as international actors, and now given ECOWAS seems to be against the creation of the Confederation because it's still trying to woo these countries back into the regional bloc. Now, in the days ahead, what should we expect?
Nothing. We should expect nothing. I think that ECOWAS is just a bunch of talk and absolutely nothing. ECOWAS, it's a lame dog. ECOWAS has no strength, has no power, has no ability to do anything. ECOWAS, it's having tremendous economic issues. The economy of Nigeria is tanking, and this money is so devalued. Things are at hardship everywhere. I think that these countries should focus a little bit on helping their nations, rather than standing up, to those boys in the Sahel doing the beating of the West. So there's really nothing to expect. If there be anything to expect, is to watch those boys in Sahel hopefully, deliver for us a more prosperous states where individuals in this nation will just become the best that the continent has seen. And by the way, 2024, Niger is projected to be the 7th fastest growing economy, in the world, first on the continent of Africa. In the few months that these boys have been in power, I think that what they have done is a testament to the ideals that once we collectively as a people decide that we want to be better, that we collectively as a people decide that we want to have a life that we fully love and one that, we've built for ourselves, that on the continent of Africa, that too is possible. It's not just outside of the continent. So to understand that in just a couple of months after taking power, howbeit forcefully, taking Bazoum out of the scene, this country is the fastest growing country, on the continent of Africa, and then 7th projected for 2024, in all economic index in the world. That is remarkable, considering the fact that Niger was at the bottom of the barrel in terms of all economic human index. This is just, it's a miracle. It's a miracle in the Sahel. Niger truly is a miracle in the Sahel. And if that effort is spread across these 3 nations, then we are looking at a region that will become, a touristic destination, for the future. So I hope that whatever is happening in Niger spread to those other nations and then eventually spread to West Africa. Hopefully, the African can be able to learn a thing or two from those boys in the Sahel.
Thank you immensely. Now to conclude today's edition, now in a closing remarks, just in a bit to crown up today's conversation, just a few words before we can draw down the curtains of today's program.
Well, I am optimistic that the continent will become great. I'm optimistic that the continent will not suffer from the issues of the past. I believe sincerely that once we start looking at the continent from a cultural perspective as Africans, believing in our ideals, believing that we are who we are, not because we are a byproduct of human civilization, but because we are the originators and creators of Western civilization, believing that everything that the West experiences experiences came actually out from Africa, then we will become everything that we have to be. I want Africans to believe that other Africans carry within them the template, the blueprint for the salvation of the continent. If you are waiting for a white man to come, you are waiting for a slaver. If you are waiting for a European to show up, what will show up is a slaver. He is coming to loot. He is coming to pick our golds and our diamonds. He is not coming for the best interest of the African. Your deliverer is you and your brother.
Thank you, Mantley. Ladies and gentlemen, that was FONGOD STANLEY, who is a Pan-Africanist economist, and he doubles as the CEO of Preston FinTech, who was with us, our guest for today. Thank you, Mantley, for being part with us on today's edition of the program.
Thank you so much, Sharon, for inviting me. Hope to see you soon.
Meanwhile, it's on that note that we shall be drawing down the curtains of today's edition of Talking Point of our Pan-African Media for You Media Africa. Meanwhile, I've been NJIX NABESEH for presentation, and we leave you in company of our numerous programs. Bye-bye.